to our automation webinar series, which is sponsored by Black Hills IP. Black Hills IP is a US-based IP docketing and paralegal service provider that focuses on using technology and automation to provide the highest level of quality available today in outsourced services. For this webinar series, we are bringing together experts to talk about how automation, artificial intelligence, and expert systems are being used in the legal field. The automation webinar series is free. This is one of several monthly webinars in this series. The schedule and registration information for upcoming webinars is listed on our website. To register for any of those future webinars, you can go to the Educational Resources tab on the Black Hills IP website, which is www.blackhillsip.com. The webinar that we are presenting today will cover document proofing. We've allowed time for questions at the end of the program, but questions can be submitted using the question button on the right-hand side of your browser window in the control panel box anytime during the presentation. The question will be held in the queue until the end of the presentation, but then we'll take them at the end. The presenters today are myself and Ivy Gray. I'm Ann McCracken, president of Black Hills IP. I'm a patent attorney with 21 years experience in patent prosecution. I was a partner at the Schwegman Lundberg Wissner firm for 10 years, and I was also a full-time law professor, and I directed the patent prosecution program at Franklin Pierce Law Center for 5 years. Before we get started, I wanted to, I'm sorry, Ivy, can you please introduce yourself? Sorry about that.
Sure, no problem. So my name is Ivy Gray. I'm a practicing lawyer. I've been practicing for 10 years. I'm actively licensed in Oregon, New York, and Illinois. My primary practice area is corporate bankruptcy with a special focus on distressed intellectual property assets. I am also the creator of American Legal Style for Perfected, which is a proofreading and editing program designed for lawyers.
Thank you very much. Great. Thank you very much, Ivy, for joining us today and talking to us about Perfected and just proofing in general. Before we get started, I would like to just give an overview of the webinar series that this is a part of. The webinar series has already had 2 programs, one on document automation and the second one on expert systems. This is the 3rd one in the series, and the ones coming up in the future will focus on transaction management, legal research AI tools, machine-assisted due diligence, and document and contract analysis. So if you're interested in any of those, please take a look at our website and register for them. For today's program, we're going to touch on a number of topics. First, just the overall importance of proofing in the legal field. Second, we'll talk about the difference between proofreading, editing, and spell check. Then there's some very simple and easy features available to everybody in Microsoft Word, and Ivy's going to demonstrate how to use those features. Then there are specialized software programs specifically for proofing that we'll talk about. Finally, we'll go into a brief case study of an IP firm that's been using one of those software tools for quite some time. And then at the very end, I'd like to talk briefly about the future and the potential for document proofreading software going forward. So at this point, Ivy, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk about the importance of proofreading.
All right, thank you, Ann. So proofreading is incredibly important because for lawyers, we are professional writers. And our written documents are often the only tangible deliverable that we give to a client. It's the only evidence of the work that we've created or the thinking and advice that we've done. So it's very important that this information is captured properly. And we recognize that, so we spend a lot of time proofreading, or at least we should. In the research that we did in intelligent editing, we found that lawyers spend 3.5 hours per week about editing text. And in a LexisNexis study, they found that lawyers are spending more than 10 hours per week. But it's still a lot of work, and it's not really billable. So the LexisNexis study found that a third of lawyers were skipping proofreading despite the commercial and compliance risk. Now that's a really big deal because our reputation depends on doing work properly. When people see errors, they assume that there are going to be substantive issues throughout the document. And a recent study by Lexicata found that it is the true statement. Where there are small issues, there tend to be larger issues, and those also tend to make a real difference in terms of the outcome of the case or the protection of a company's assets. So proofreading is a tedious but necessary task.
Well, and certainly in my experience, I found that even if there weren't real errors, if there were proofreading issues, there was at least a perception that there were probably other bigger errors, and that impacted the relationship between the client and the law firm too. So it is very important.
Right, and with what you just said, Anne, right there. Now that Lexicata study that Judicata study has come out, it just reinforces that thinking. So any time that you used to be able to push back and say, oh, well, the law was correct, you really shouldn't worry too much about that small typo. Now that Judicata has found that really where there are typos, there are substantive errors, the clients are going to push back so much more than that. And even where they may not understand the law or understand what you're doing, they're certainly going to recognize a typo, especially if it's in their own name or in a project that they created. So proofreading really is important.
It is. Well, let's shift gears now. And Ivy, can you explain the difference between proofreading, editing, and spell check?
Sure. So a lot of times people use these terms interchangeably, not really realizing that they are different. And a study showed that effective writers spend about 35% of their time in any given assignment on proofreading, editing, spell checking, revising. And that is the appropriate amount of time to spend. So think about that. What is it that you are doing when you're doing each of these tasks? So editing is really the first task that you should undertake, and you should do it after you have a fairly complete document. All of your ideas should be there on the page and fleshed out. You should be comfortable with the contents of your document. At this stage, you're trying to make your document better. So editing is the process of improving content, clarity, structure, and substance. It involves checking the content of the text to ensure that ideas are expressed clearly and logically and form a coherent and meaningful whole, which a lot of people just don't do. You need to think about it all together. So once you finish editing, you can move on to proofreading. But I would say don't begin to proofread until you've really finished the editing task. Otherwise, you'll have to do the proofreading all over again because things will move around or change. So proofreading is the last task that you should perform. It involves checking over your text in fine detail, the process of reviewing a completed written document for inconsistencies, spelling, grammar, punctuation errors, formatting mistakes, typos, checking for inconsistencies. These are really related and integral parts of the writing process. And the impact of a well-written document is just so worth it. So spell checking is a different thing. Spell checking is really just all about using the software tool that is built into Microsoft Word to correct spelling of common words. Spell check does not deal with your terms of art unless you've added them into your dictionary. Spell check won't catch your special usage. Spell check really will cause a lot of problems for complex scientific documents and complex legal documents. And that is going to be a real issue when you are working in IP because you're going to have both.
Wow, did you say 35% of the time spent on a document is on the combination of these three things altogether? Is that what you said?
Yes, that is what studies have found, that to be an effective writer, you should spend 35% of your time on these three tasks.
Wow, that's a lot of time, and certainly in the IP field, and for our audience members who are doing patent prosecution and law firms, many of us are dealing with fixed budgets for the work that we're doing. And if a third of our time is going to editing, proofreading, and spell checking the document, that's really cutting into our budget for the substantive arguments that we need to make. So I can certainly see the case for finding ways to use technology to speed up that process, to give you more time in a fixed budget to work on the substantive arguments.
Absolutely. And another thing that I've found is that even if you have the intent to give yourself this time for proofreading, editing, spell checking, you tend to run out of time. Other projects pop up, things take longer than you expect, and then you just have less time at the end than you intended. And having some other way to shorten that process but maintain the quality becomes a really key part of being an effective lawyer or an effective paralegal or patent agent.
Well, then let's talk about some of those tools that are available to everybody right now, because I think most people are using Microsoft Word. And then we'll get into some other tools that people probably don't have, but there's some really easy things that people can utilize right in Word. So, Ivy, can you talk about some of those things?
Right. So they're right here in the program that you're using, and they're free. And a lot of times people think, oh, Microsoft Word, whatever, it's just a glorified typewriter. But over the years, Microsoft has become incredibly powerful, and it's gotten a lot better with natural language processing. And it's also added a lot of tools that will really help you with your proofreading. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to use the read aloud feature. Reading aloud helps me to figure out where I have missed words, which spell check or no program can really do because it doesn't catch what you intend to do, but it will really sound strange and grating to your ear in that robotic voice. So if you read your document aloud, just using that read aloud feature right there in the review ribbon, it will help you recognize that something has gone wrong with your document. And it will also make it unfamiliar enough to you where you won't be compensating or filling in things yourself. And I know you had a different experience on where that was, or you said you were also using that on your Mac in a different way.
Yeah, so I use the read aloud function on other things too outside of Microsoft Word. So where I commonly use it is to read my emails back to me, and that obviously isn't within Word, but I've been able to get the same functionality through the system preferences, and I use a Mac. So within my system preferences, there's a preference panel for accessibility. And within the accessibility preferences, there's a speech subset of preferences. And within that speech button, there's a place where you can check a box that says, speak selected text when this key is pressed. And for me, I have it set to Control T, T for talk. And so when I select the text of my email in Outlook, I just do Control T and it will read back the text of the email to me. And you can change that key. You can have it be set to anything that you want if you have Control T set for something else already. But it's the same idea as what you were talking about, Ivy, within the functions that are built into Word. Within a Mac, you can certainly apply that to any application by using the setting that's in the system preferences. And I'm sure that PCs have something similar that you could set up so that you can take advantage of that read aloud function for applications outside of Word as well.
Right. And, if that's not one that you love, the real key here is, or with this tip, is making the document unfamiliar to you so that you can catch mistakes. So other ways that you can make the document unfamiliar is to change the font, change the size of the font, change the text, change the color. You can do lots of different things, add extra spaces, just make it unfamiliar to you so that you are not filling in and seeing what you meant to write rather than what you actually did write. So let's look at customizing your proofing options.
Yep, those are great tips. So yeah, let's go on to your proofing options.
Sure. So again, these things are built into Microsoft Word, and you can take advantage of what you have. It won't cost you any more money, but it will reduce your frustration, save you time, and it will make that 35% of your time that you should be spending seem a lot more reasonable. So if you go to File, in your Microsoft Word document and you click on it, you will end up seeing this menu where you have a little arrow. At the bottom of that menu on the left-hand side, you'll see a button called Options. When you click Options, it will bring you to this menu that gives you proofing options, and proofing is the third choice. There, you can make 4 essential changes. So let's go to that next page. So these are 4 essential alterations that I would say that every lawyer should be making when they're using Microsoft Word. The first one is actually checking words in uppercase. The second one is using readability statistics so that you can get out of your head about what you think lawyers are supposed to write or what you think scientists are supposed to write, and start writing in a more readable way. The third thing is that you can customize your dictionary and add words that Microsoft Word does not recognize. That can be things like your firm name, chemicals, agents, whatever it is that you use, you can add to your custom dictionary. And then you can also change your autocorrect options so that if you have a common mistake, you can just change that right away. So we're going to get into those a little bit more. So let's look at the next slide.
And actually, Ivy, before you jump into this one, I just wanted to comment. I'm not sure if this is because I'm using a Mac version of Word or because maybe I'm on an older version of Office, but my menu preferences have all those things you talked about. They're just organized slightly differently. So on my version of Office on the Mac, I go to my Preferences menu, and then I have a Spelling and Grammar menu where I can ignore the uppercase words, have my custom dictionaries, and select the readability statistics. So 1, 2, and 3 on your screen. The autocorrect options for me are in a different menu, still within my preferences menu, but there's a special menu for autocorrect. So it may look a little bit different than what we're showing you here, but these functions are there, and just look for them in the version of the software that you're using.
Right. So as Anne was saying with that, starting in Office 2016 and Office 365, Microsoft Word actually joined the proofreading that joined spell checking, grammar check together to make a proofreading singular tab in an item called Editor. And it just became a lot more powerful, and they've been rolling out probably monthly newer and more powerful checks. So it really is a reason to upgrade. It's incredible what Word can do. And as somebody who designs software that plugs into Microsoft Word, I have to stay up with all of Microsoft's features and stay ahead of them so that I am still offering something of value. And let me tell you, Microsoft's doing a great job. You really should upgrade and get the benefit of all of these constant changes. So here we are, back to checking words in all caps. I was having a Twitter discussion, and a court had issued an opinion and had an error in the all caps title. And people were just like, oh my gosh, it's so embarrassing. It's really too bad that Microsoft doesn't check words in all caps. And I said, what? Of course Microsoft Word checks words in all caps. And you can do that too. So you can change that in your proofing. The default is that very top feature is checked, which is ignore words in uppercase. A lot of people leave that checked because it can be things like random numbers, VIN numbers, case numbers, etc. And they're a strange collection of things, and you don't want to have those red squigglies everywhere. But that's not really how lawyers use words in all caps. They often use words in all caps for boilerplate or for important text or what have you. And when there are errors in that text, it just really stands out, and it's embarrassing. Yet it's something that people often skip when they're reading and when they're proofing because they're looking at the other stuff. So avoid embarrassing errors like clicking this simple checkbox and making sure that it says that you want to read the words in uppercase rather than ignoring the words in uppercase. Anne, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
No, not on this one. Let's go on to the next couple.
Cool. All right. So readability statistics. These have actually been part of Microsoft Word for about the last 10 years, but people have not been paying attention to them until recently. So these are the Fleisch Reading Ease test and the Flesch-Kincaid grade level test. And you can turn these on by checking Show Readability Statistics. And once it's on, it stays on. So you've changed your default. And after you've run spell check and grammar check, at the very end, it will actually run this test. And it will give you a readout of how many words you have, how many characters you have, your length of sentence, and et cetera. And it tends to be that if your sentences are long, your document is going to be less readable. If you're using words with lots of characters, your document is going to be less readable or less understandable. And so it takes those statistics and puts them together and gives you a grade. Optimal reading ease should really be a 60 to 70. So if you're writing for a regular audience or trying to convince somebody who was not a professional, 60 to 70 would be what you are aiming for. But most legal documents are in the 40 to 50 range. If you can get it above 50 and aim for 60, that's even better, because the more understandable your work, the easier it is to defend and the easier it is to get somebody to agree with what you are trying to say. The other test is the grade level test. For a general audience, that's grade 7 or 8. So that's not a high school reading level. That is general audience. That's, junior high. And most newspapers are written for a grade 7 or 8 level. But if you are, say, writing for an audience that is typically a Wall Street Journal reader, then you're going to find that those are written for high school age type readers, not college age readers. So if you are writing and only somebody with a PhD could understand what you're doing, then you probably want to rewrite it, even if you are a science writer. The more readable, the better. And this test, it's free, it works, it runs at the end. It's just a good reality check for the sort of writing that you've done. Okay, let's go on to altering your dictionary. So altering your dictionary is really good because you can add words that Word thinks are wrong. So your firm name, the name of a chemical or a product that you've created, a pharmaceutical brand name, all of those things you can add to your dictionary so that Microsoft Word doesn't think that they're wrong. And I use this because I get frustrated when I have to spend a lot of time telling Word that something is fine. And it discourages me from actually running spell check. And I found that a lot of lawyers will stop using it simply because there are so many legal specific words that Microsoft Word doesn't recognize that you get bogged down and it becomes so full of false positives that it is no longer a useful tool. So you can avoid that by adding words to your custom dictionary. So then let's look at altering autocorrect, unless you have something to add, Anne?
Well, I do think the adding words to the custom dictionary is particularly helpful in our field because, again, most of us are dealing with patent applications that have some type of technical terms in them. And if you work in the same technology space over and over, there's probably some terms that you may be using again and again. And those are great ones from an efficiency standpoint to add to your custom dictionary so they don't get flagged over and over for you. So, yeah, let's talk about autocorrect.
Sure. So there are a couple of things that are parts of autocorrect. So when you click on the button to change the autocorrect options, you can do a few things. So the first is that you can change your defaults. There are two defaults that are already checked when you get Microsoft out of the box, essentially. So one is that fractions are turned into a fraction character. So 1/2 ends up being this tiny little symbol character. And that is not what legal style conventions tell you to do. In fact, they're very against it. Also, when you are performing a search or if you're doing a find and replace, If you are searching for 1/2 and instead it has a character, it's not going to find those things. So you want to write consistently so that you can find consistently. The same with ordinals. Microsoft will automatically change ordinals into a superscript, and that is, again, the opposite of the Blue Book conventions and legal writing style guide. It's really annoying to type it, have it automatically change, and then have to undo it every single time that you write. Instead, you can just change your preferences right here in the autocorrect preference category. Another thing that you can do is, if there are words that you always misspell, you can change them so that word automatically fixes it. And you can also create your own, say, if you've ever used Text Expander or I'm trying to like text. There are a couple of other tools where you can type a 2 or 3 word or 3-letter code, and then it will autocomplete anything that you have to say. You can actually force autocorrect to do that for you. You can also use autocorrect to insert symbols that are really just a pain for you to have to go to the symbol category and insert it every single time. So for me, I include my firm name here, and so I just type my firm name initials. I also use, for any symbol that I want to do, I take the first name of the symbol and I put it in parentheses. So if I type paren S paren, then I'm going to get the section symbol. And I started doing this in law school, and people were just amazed at how fast I could get through things. I type about 120 words a minute, and I do it with 90% accuracy. Well, I pretend to do it with 90% accuracy, but I've really hacked autocorrect to do what I want it to do. And it helps me to have that level of consistency and accuracy so I can get through my documents faster without having to think so much. It's really about knowing yourself, knowing what frustrates you, knowing what you get wrong, and just fixing it on the front end. So you can do that. And then, as I was saying, you can also just be a lot faster and more efficient by using 2- and 3-letter combinations to get an entire long string of something written out if it's something that you use on a regular basis, and that's really hard to spell, especially if it's something that you have to look up over and over and over again. So autocorrect can be your friend and really save you a lot of time and frustration.
Yeah, and an example of that for me with patent applications is there are some phrases that we use over and over in the body of a patent application, like in some embodiments, for example. And I would just, through autocorrect, have ISE, and I just type ISE, and it would replace it with in some embodiments. And there's a lot of phrases, if people think about the style that they use for their patent applications, there's probably a lot of phrases that you use multiple times throughout the document, and you can really speed up your writing process if you can just have a 2- or 3-letter code that you put in that will autofill with the full text for that phrase. Also helps you a lot with consistency in your document too. So these are great tips. And these are all
they're free.
Yep. And these are all things, like you said, that are available to anybody who's using Microsoft Word. And there's a lot of efficiencies that you can gain just from incorporating these things into your writing process. But in addition, there are some tools out there, software products, that can go even above and beyond this. So let's talk about what proofreading and editing software can do to help above and beyond what's available through Microsoft Word.
Right. So there are a few proofreading and editing software tools out there. And there are a lot that work for any old casual writer, but what you really want is something that is designed for what you're doing, something that's designed for lawyers, and something that can be adapted for what you are doing. So you want to be able to marry the legal side and the science writing side so that you can get the most out of your documents and create the most complete, the most consistent, the most perfect document that you can. And proofreading software can really help you do this. The key is, though, to select the right software. There are a few issues that people regularly have, and I would say that the most common ones are, as you see on the screen, substantive definition checking, which is the process of looking at putting your finger on the definition and then going through and looking for every single instance of that term as it has been used in the document and making sure that the definition and the use match up. That can take a really long time, but it is substantive and absolutely matters to the document that you're creating and the meaning of your document. Substantive definition checking also involves making sure that if you have abbreviated something, you abbreviate it consistently throughout. If you create a defined term, that you actually use the defined term, that you don't use the defined term before you actually created it, etc. If that is your issue, then you're going to want to choose a program that is really strong in that area. Another issue is cross-reference checking. It is a little bit of a pain to insert cross-references in Microsoft Word, but once you've done it, it automatically updates, and it's just so worth it. Cross-reference checking is, again, putting your finger on the original instance of that provision in a document, and then looking for every other instance where it's referenced to make sure that that's really what you intended to reference. Whereas if you just link it in Microsoft Word, it will update and be accurate. There are programs that will help you with that specifically. Another is enforcing writing style preferences. So when you're doing that, that can be anything from how your company uses hyphens, short and plain writing, plain English, concise writing, your heading style, the way that you use, the way that you label tables or graphs. All of that is part of your writing style preferences. And then layer on it expectations that come from your industry. So you want to be able to enforce those sorts of things. And finally, checking for consistency. Consistency can either be document-wide, or it can be firm-wide, or it can just be within a collection of documents. And you want to make sure that you've spelled everything the same, that capitalized words are capitalized consistently throughout because they have a specified use, that your formatting is consistent, so that if something is bold, it is always bold, or if it's italic, it's always italicized. That you either consistently use the Oxford comma or that you don't, that you consistently use a comma or semicolon. All of those things can really matter in the substance of your document, how it is interpreted, how it is understood, and the overall effectiveness of your document. So depending on the issues that you have, you're going to want to choose a software program that is really focused on doing the thing that is causing you the biggest problem. So let's look at our options. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I reviewed these options for an ILTA white paper. So it's an ILTA Office 365 white paper. If you'd like to check it out, it's on their website. It was published in December 2017. And the 5 add-ins, and when I say add-ins, those are basically apps for Microsoft Word that run within Microsoft Word. They are WordRake, Perfectit, Compass by J. Eugene, Contract Tools, and Contract Companion. Now, they each have their own strengths, and they will do what you really need it to do. This is how I really categorize it. So I felt that Compass was the best if you're struggling with defined terms and cross-referencing across multiple documents. One of its outstanding features was just how beautifully the definitions and the cross-references appear. It uses a hover feature where you actually have the term and the definition right there in front of you. So it's just gorgeous and one of the most useful things. The big drawback is that it's actually an API and not a Word add-in. So any changes that you make, or you can't actually make changes in the program, you can just see what changes you need to make. So you have to write it down and transfer it, which introduces potential for risk. That said, the presentation is just gorgeous. And you get 8 documents free each month. The next is Contract Tools. Contract Tools is really great for consistently using defined terms as you write. So if you have said, if you've labeled something the application, and then later you might want to say the patent application, Contract Tools will help you to notice that you're using those interchangeably as you are writing. So I really like that, and that's a great feature. So if that's your problem, I would choose Contract Tools. Contract Companion is really incredible because it does all of those other things in a similar way, but it will also help you check to make sure that your phrasing is consistent in common legal terms. So if you've said including but not limited to, and sometimes use the comma and sometimes not, it will help to make sure that you actually do that consistently throughout your document. Or if you say goods and chattels, and in some places you say goods or chattels, it will call your attention to that inconsistency. So it will really help to make sure that you do that throughout your document appropriately. For me, Contract Companion is the most robust of those three tools that I just mentioned: Compass, Contract Tools, and Contract Companion. Then can we stick with that last page? Sorry, Anne.
Sorry about that.
Cool. Okay. And then the final two are WordRake and Perfectit. And the other three were really just contract focused, or transactional practice focused. WordRake and Perfectit will also work if you have a litigation practice in addition to a transactional practice. So WordRake is really great if you're struggling with like wordiness and legalese. And just because you're working with scientific documents, it doesn't mean that it has to be gobbledygook. You can still use plain English as much as possible, and WordRake will help you do that. And the beauty of WordRake is that it uses Microsoft Word's track changes feature, so it's very familiar. You see all the red lines, and you can click on them, accept them, or not accept them, and it's just really simple and clean. Perfectit is my program, and it runs more like spell check, and it walks you through your inconsistencies one by one. And I can talk a little bit more about what Perfectit does. But one of the key things is that it allows you to write your own way, and it worries about consistency in your document, but it also can impose outside rules if you want it to. Perfectit will also help you with capitalization of defined terms and comparing all of those things. And one of the beauties of it is that it groups all of your errors together so that you aren't changing your thinking each time you get to a new thing. It's not just going in order, it's going by logical group. Okay, now we can look at the table. So in the white paper, I produced a table so that you could compare all of the documents and see their pricing, which was just really, for me, an easier way to see what was there, what wasn't there, and to make my choice. So that is, so that's this chart. A lot of people have just been really, they were floored by the chart. It's been shared a lot, and they have said that it really helps with their decision making and in terms of deciding what options they're going to explore at their firms. Okay.
So there really isn't one tool that fits all. You need to think about what you really need help with and then match the tool to what you are really needing the most help with, right?
Correct. And the nice thing is that a lot of the options are low cost, so you can combine them if you like. And I have a lot of them installed on my computer, and I ran this test using all of them on my computer at once. So I know that they do play well together. If you were really gung-ho and wanted all of them, you could, but they definitely play well together. So if you wanted to purchase one or more, you could. And at the low prices that they are, it just, if you're wasting a lot of your time on proofreading and checking, I really see no reason not to spend the money and focus more on substance and let the computer do something else.
Well, yeah, especially when you think about what most attorneys' hourly rates are, and you look at these as annual fees for these tools, it's easy to do the math on how much time it's going to save you and that it will easily pay for itself, whether you have one or a combination of these tools that you're utilizing. So that's really helpful.
Right.
I'd like to talk next about a actual use case for Perfect-It. And I know Perfect-It is used in all different areas of law, but I found it very interesting that one of the law firms that was an early adopter of this software tool was an IP firm, or still is an IP firm, actually. So can you tell us a little bit about what Perfect-It can do for somebody writing patent applications?
Sure. So what Auerbach Schropp found was that consistency was just a really big thing in patent applications. And getting it right on the front end would really save the client a lot of time and money and save the firm a lot of frustration and protect reputation. And with a lot of scientific terms, there's just a great potential to get things wrong. So for instance, with antigen binding site, if it's used as a defined term, then you are going to want to have caps. And you're going to, and maybe you want to use a hyphen. But if you have it in a different place, say you cut and paste from somewhere else, or you included something the client wrote for you, but it didn't match your style, it may be written without the caps and without the hyphen, and that could be taken to mean something else. And if your patent were litigated, this could really matter. So that's a big thing. We also check for table numbers to make sure that the numbers aren't inconsistent or out of order. It helps you find that and remedying it really easily. Same with table headings. And Perfect-It will also check to make sure that you've deleted any notes or comments from your document. A lot of times people use the notes and comments feature to pass the document back and forth and to collaborate. But if those comments are hidden, they'll forget to delete them. And Perfect-It will find that for you too. So it can just be a really useful thing. But what this client or what this customer found was that Perfect-It just really saved a lot of time because if errors were discovered after the fact by patent, like once it was submitted and patent examiners found it, it would just be really costly and slow down the process. And then you'd have to direct what changes you need made on a character by character basis. That's just time consuming. And if you can avoid that on the front end, there's no reason not to avoid that. I mean, if you're looking at the difference between antigen binding site and antigen binding site, I can see 4 changes that would have to be made just there. And that is ridiculously time consuming. You can avoid that by using Perfect-It. So this firm was an early adopter of Perfect-It. They really cared about these seemingly minor inconsistencies that can have major consequences. And they have just really increased their client satisfaction and their client retention by using a program like this.
Well, and you're absolutely right that the ease of making the change before you file a patent application is it's much easier than after you file it when you have to file an amendment with the patent office, or worse yet, if those errors stay in the document through the process and the grant, then you may have to file a COC and even pay money to have applicant errors corrected. But I do want to make the distinction because many of us in this field use the term patent proofreading to refer to a very specific process that applies once the patent has granted and the patent that's typeset by the USPTO is compared to the documents that the applicant submitted to the patent office during the prosecution process to ensure that the final version that the patent office created accurately reflects what was submitted by the applicant. And this is not a tool for that. That is a very complex and involved process where you have to walk through the prosecution history typically to make sure that everything that was submitted actually winds up in the end document for the patent office, or in the end issued patent. And patent proofreading is something that Black Hills IP does and other vendors do as a service. This is focused on the document when you're creating it prior to submission. That's where Perfect-It is really going to help you because you can avoid having to address those errors through a more costly process to fix it after it's filed. That's the context that we're talking about here, as opposed to what many of us in the in the prosecution field think of as patent proofreading when we're talking about granted patents.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that distinction, Anne.
Yeah, sure. So let's just in our last few minutes talk a little bit about where the technology is headed, because Ivy, I know you're very, very involved in the future development of Perfect-It, but also just involved in where this technology is going. So I'd like to get your thoughts on a few questions. First of all,
sure.
What types of documents work best for patent proofreading software in general?
So I would say that the longer the document, the more useful automated proofreading software is going to be. If it's something where you get tired and you lose focus, then you should let technology step in, and that's where it's really going to help. If it's a paragraph or 1 page, you can probably do that yourself. If it is 10 pages, then that's where you really want to make sure that a program is there to help you.
Okay. Another thing I find interesting when we're talking about implementing automation in organizations and automated tools is who is it that actually uses them within the organization? So for the patent proofreading software, if we're talking about a law firm, is it the attorney that's using it? Is it a paralegal or a admin? Who would be the one who would use this type of software?
Well, it depends on how involved the attorneys are in creating their own documents. At some firms, we have had everyone use the software where it's rolled out firm-wide, and they create a firm style, and then everyone applies that firm style. At some firms, only the document management group uses it. And at other firms, only the paralegals and patent agents use it. It really depends on how your firm thinks of the document creation process and the document creation life cycle. I would say that anybody who would think to run spell check should also manage and use this sort of software.
Okay. What do you expect to see as the future trends in document proofreading automation?
I'm seeing that it is becoming more and more contextual and customizable. So what I mean by that is that the companies are drilling down into certain industries and getting domain experts to really contribute and provide more context so that you reduce false positives and make your proofing more powerful by understanding the context of what you are looking at. So that's really exciting. And the other thing is customization is becoming more of an important feature. And one of the things that we are actually adding is a style sheet manager so that you can customize and change what you would like. And you can actually create different style sheets for different clients or different style sheets for different industries, because every client in every industry tends to have its own rules. So being able to access that and have that sort of institutional memory and then the ability to apply it consistently is going to become more important. And it is something that I see more and more companies adopting and trying to make possible.
Well, I think that customization is going to make this type of automation very powerful. Certainly, I think we all have seen clients with individual preferences, and if we can customize these types of style sheets down to the client level, that would really, really be powerful as a tool for an attorney. So that's going to be really cool. Okay, one last question. This artificial intelligence will ever replace human editors and proofreaders completely?
I can say absolutely not. Artificial intelligence can only have so much judgment, and it has to be trained by people who really care. And all they can know is their experience, and they can't. They have to develop rules based on context, whereas humans can create their own rules while reading something and fill in and look at things at the overall context, not just the context of a sentence or the words around it. So we need human judgment. We need human proofreaders. We need human ability to connect the dots and really understand what it is that you meant to do here. And I don't think that AI will ever be able to reach that level.
And I agree with you, but certainly you can use AI in a way that the humans involved in the process are able to focus on the more value-added tasks, right? If they can, particularly in the proofreading context, if you can take care of the more administrative and mundane corrections with the software, then the person involved can focus on the more complex aspects of editing the document or just developing the arguments in the document and all those things that are adding the most value. And I think for law firms to be competitive as we move forward, it's going to be very critical that they look for ways to use artificial intelligence for the tasks that are more administrative in nature, and they can focus on the higher value add aspects, which are the more fun aspects of the legal practice anyway, right? I mean, that's
right. I mean, those are the thoughtful things that we really want to do. And if we can offload the things that we don't want to be doing anyway, then I think that we should. We don't want to do it. We're not good at it. Clients don't pay for it. Let software do that, and then do the higher value, thoughtful things ourselves.
Yeah, and that just brings me back to your original comment on this program that I'm still floored by, which is the 35% of the time in creating a document goes to editing and proofreading and those types of activities. So you think about that in terms of your billable hours and billing goals and how much of an impact automation tools like this can have for your legal practice. It's just, I think, amazing what it will do for people over the next several years.
Definitely.
Well, I could go on this discussion because I think it's very interesting at the academic level, but I do want to keep us moving forward. I want to remind the audience that if anybody has questions on today's program, you can submit those using the question box on the control panel that's probably on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you have questions generally about Black Hills IP's services or processes, we have Jim Brophy's contact information. He's our Vice President of Sales, and you can reach out to him. He'd be happy to talk to you. We do have a couple of questions in the queue. The first one is, what version of Word are you using? I'm not seeing read aloud as an option in Word 2010. I know for me, I'm using Microsoft Word for Mac. It's version 16.16, and I'm sure that's more recent than Word 2010. Ivy, do you know if these tools go back that far to Word 2010?
I believe that they were introduced with Word maybe 2013, but definitely 2016. And I'm pretty sure not 2010.
Okay.
I didn't care as much in 2010. But 2016 definitely, 2013 possibly.
Okay. And then the next one is with respect to the studies that you cited. Can you cite to the two studies, the LexisNexis one and the Judicata one that you spoke about earlier? How can people find those if they want to go and look at them?
Sure. So the LexisNexis study is called Dodging the Draft. So if you Google LexisNexis Dodging the Draft .pdf with spaces between all of those things, you should get to that pretty quickly. And then for Judicata, I would just Google Judicata do typos matter, and that usually comes up. They haven't produced all that much content, but they looked at a major IP case in California and looked at what happened there, and the judges were pretty harsh about misprecedent and the errors that were in those cases.
Okay, and then the last question we have is, can we get copies of the slides? And the answer is yes. We will post slides as well as an audio recording of the program on the Black Hills IP website under our Educational Resources tab. Please give us a day or two to get those processed and put out on the website, but those will definitely be available for everybody. Oops. I think that's all we have for questions. So I also want to make sure everybody knows if you have questions about Perfect It, you can contact sales@intelligentediting.com, and they also offer a 14-day free trial period if you want to try out the software. And Ivy, maybe you can tell them what they have to do to sign up for that.
It's pretty simple. So if you go to our pricing page, and you can download the free trial there for Mac or PC. So start with legal.intelligentediting.com. You just have to give something that is an email address form, and it is yours. It's the full version for free for 14 days.
Great. Well, thank you very much for making that offer available to the listeners.
Thank you.
Finally, I just want to make sure everybody knows when the next program in this series is. The next webinar is on transaction management tools. That will be a month from now, about a month from now, September 26th at 1 p.m. Central Time. Then, if you're also listening to our docketing webinars, we have a docketing webinar in our trademark series in about 2 weeks. That one is on September 12th at 1 p.m. Central. The topic for that one is tips for managing the manual entry of data when you're transferring a trademark portfolio. So how do you get all the data on a transferred portfolio into your docketing system if you're doing that manually as opposed to through some kind of electronic data conversion? So to register either for the next upcoming automation webinar or the next docketing webinar, again, you can go to the Black Hills IP website, and you can also see a full list of our other upcoming webinars on the website as well. So I want to thank the audience for participating today, and I hope that you will join us for these and other webinars in the future. And I also want to thank Ivy very much for her time and the great tips that she shared today. That was very, very useful to me personally, and I think to the rest of the audience as well. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great day.